Welcome to Make It Last, helping you keep your legal ducks in a row and your nest egg secure, with your host, Victor Medina, an estate planning and elder law attorney and certified financial planner.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Make It Last. It is Saturday morning, June 3rd, and I'm going to be talking to you today about some mistakes that people make in retirement, and I've got a special guest today. Her name is Byrne, and she's written a fantastic book called A Widow's Guide, Your Legal and Financial Guide to Surviving the First Year. She is a friend of mine, as well as a very just accomplished estate planning attorney and investment advisor, and she's written a fantastic book. I can't wait to get to that interview. But in the meantime, I wanted to say thank you to everybody that has been listening to the show and sharing all of their kind comments about how well it's going. We think it's been going great as well. And I'll tell you something, if this is something that you like, I would appreciate it if you share it with your friends. So, this show is about helping you keep your legal ducks in a row and your financial nest egg secure. And so if you know somebody who could benefit from doing that, I think you ought to send them the link to the show, tell them to tune in, or what you could do is even give them the link to the iTunes podcast. So we're on all of the podcast catchers that are out there. We're on iTunes, where you can get it on Android, you can get it on Stitcher. And so if you share that link, or if you make a search for Make It Last, you can subscribe and not only listen to this show, but listen to all the prior shows as well. If you have any ideas for any shows that you want to hear more about, I'd ask you to go ahead and send it to feedback@makeitlastradio.com. And if you do that, you'll suggest some show topics for us, and we'll bring them into to what we have to talk about. So thanks so much for all of that. Now, I don't want to waste any more time. I want to go right into the topics because we have a lot to cover today. The topic that I wanted to cover first in the first segment before we get to our special guest is, I read a fantastic article about mental mistakes that people are making with their retirement spending. And it struck me as being very, very accurate, because when we come in and meet with retirees and we're trying to, my job, what I do with clients is really try to help them preserve their wealth. So we might think of ourselves as wealth preservation or wealth protection strategist. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that whatever they have accumulated during their lifetime, they don't lose, and that they pass it on as effectively and as efficiently as possible, as protected as possible. But that has led to some mistakes that people come in thinking about, before they get to retirement, that carries through, until we help educate them differently. We're going to go through 8 of those mistakes, and we're going to go through them as quickly as possible. Now, one of the ones that I think hits people hard, and it comes up a lot, is the idea of longevity and how long someone's going to live. It turns out that the studies are suggesting that you will die sooner than you think. I was trying to think of a nice way of saying that, but there's no nice way of saying that. So according to the data by the Social Security Administration, a man who reaches 65 today in 2017 can expect to live on average till about age 84. And a woman turning 65 today can expect to live on average till about 86. So that's a little bit younger than most people think. They think that they might get to 90 or later. And it turns out only about 1 out of every 4 65-year-olds today will live past age 90. Now, that contrasts with a study on people's belief, because that reveals that while younger people underestimate their longevity, older people overestimate it. So on a survey, there are 68-year-old men, 71% of them believe they have a chance of living to 78, but they have an 82% chance of actually reaching that age. So they kind of overestimate that, by almost 10%. By 10%, think that they'll get there but the numbers don't suggest that. So that kind of overestimation relates back to a mistake in retirement spending, because people also overestimate how much they will need in retirement and underestimate how much they can spend. And we're certainly not suggesting that people, go crazy and try to coast in at 95, not owning anything. But on the average, people can actually increase their spending habits in retirement a little bit more than they think. Now, they have to do that smartly, because if they're constantly liquidating their account to spend that money, if they haven't put a plan around this retirement spending, that they could actually run out of money a little bit sooner, because depending on market conditions, it may not work out well. So you have to have a smart plan. I think that's what I'm trying to leave you with. And you have to consider your retirement income spending as part of different buckets that you have. You're going to have, certain buckets that you spend on. Some is guaranteed income. Some is, money that you can use. But the idea is that you should probably increase your spending if what you're calculating is that you're going to live to 95. Another mistake that people make in retirement spending is delaying that gratification to spending on the good stuff. Right. So my parents are an example that I like to highlight because I have been encouraging them to do things like take trips now. They're a little bit younger on the younger side of retirement. They're on the upper side of 60. And while they're certainly not saving money for retirement, they haven't thought about, well, I'm going to do that later. I'm trying to impress upon them this idea that, you're not going to have the opportunity to do that later. You're not going to be able to walk the cobblestone streets of Spain when you're 80. That's not going to be something that you're going to want to do. So what we ought to be thinking about is actually enjoying that stuff today and not worrying about so much, being financially prudent and delaying the gratification because people who get older suffer physical limitations that makes them less capable of spending that money. And then for personal reasons, the older that they get, a spouse may pass away. And if they do, they're less inclined to spend money. They're less inclined to take those trips around. So I think it's important to remember that you could be spending more money and you could be doing it sooner rather than waiting for later. That's really what we're thinking about here. Now, there are other mistakes that have been made. I'll give you some of them. Some have to do with investing, and one of them has to do with trying to time the market and doing their investment management as they get older. Trading in your retirement portfolio and managing that and not asking somebody to help, I think is one of those major mistakes. And in fact, the Wall Street Journal article agrees with me. Trading by amateurs is akin to kind of baking by amateur bakers. You'll never get a good loaf of bread because you'll constantly be opening the oven door all the time. You don't have the experience to really understand how things work. And all of the research suggests that, in fact, investors are notoriously bad at evaluating the risk they're taking with their portfolios. And that's because they're thinking the way that they were when they were still in the workplace. They don't realize that, that the wealth of young people is in their income. When you're retired, it's in your savings. And you can't afford to take as much risk because you can't fall back on the human capital that it took to essentially make that money. If that makes sense, you can't go back into the workforce and make it up by saving more and letting that time. So you need to be thinking about taking your retirement savings and putting them in a well-diversified portfolio, which includes, in many cases, guaranteed retirement income, because if you miss out on that, if you miscalculate that, it can have serious impacts because you neither have the time nor the ability to make that back up. You can't go back into the workforce, and you don't have time for that market to come back on you. And I think the last one that we're going to leave you on in terms of the mistakes is that it's often better to give with a warm hand than a cold one. So, when we ask clients, what do you want to leave behind? They always say that they want to leave their stuff to their children in equal shares. And I said, well, is there anything that you want to give them now? Because while people also overestimate how long they'll need money and they'll underspend on that, leaving that kind of gift for after you're gone is probably less enjoyable than doing that during their lifetime. And there's a lot of joy that's related to giving, and you may want to think about doing that while you're still around as opposed to after you're gone. All right, so those are the major mistakes in retirement. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk with Anna Byrne, an author who's written A Widow's Guide, your legal and financial guide to surviving the first year. I think this is going to be a great topic because, many people do have to deal with the loss of a spouse, and moving on from that and understanding what steps they have to take, I think it's going to be great because, people get so lost at that period of time. So anyway, join us when we come back with special guest Anna Byrne here on Make It Last with Victor Medina.
Hi, folks, it's Bert. You know, there are more than 500 different ways to claim your Social Security benefits. On June 27th at 6 p.m., Victor Medina is holding a workshop where you'll learn about many of the strategies you can use to help maximize your Social Security benefits. Victor Medina, host of the Make It Last radio show, is a certified financial planner and highly knowledgeable in Social Security matters and will guide you through the potential pitfalls and windfalls of Social Security. This is strictly an educational workshop. No products will be promoted. Topics covered will include how to decide when you should apply for benefits, should it be now or later, strategies to help maximize your Social Security benefits, and the 3 biggest mistakes people make with Social Security. Victor Medina will be hosting this educational workshop where you'll be able to ask him questions about your Social Security options. In addition, every attendee will get a free copy of his retirement planning book, Make It Last, ensuring your nest egg is around as long as you are. The workshop will be held on June 27th at 6 p.m. at the Conference Center at Mercer Community College in Princeton Junction. For more information, go to makeitlastradio.com/Social Security. Space is limited, so visit makeitlastradio.com/Social Security now to reserve your spot.
Welcome back from the break. I have our very special guest, Anna Byrne. Anna Byrne is an estate planning attorney as well as an investment advisor. So she's a little bit like me, except that she hails from the great state of Massachusetts. And she's our guest today because she's written a new book, and that book is called A Widow's Guide: Your Legal and Financial Guide to Surviving Your First Year. So welcome, Anna, to the show.
Hi, Victor. Thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to join you.
Well, thank you for making time in your schedule to talk about it. As you may know, this show is about helping people through the retirement journey. And one of those steps for our married folks, unfortunately, always deals with the loss of one of the spouses. And, this idea that there are things to do and that there's a journey involved in that, I think is something that's sort of underserved in the counseling that goes on. So I want to get to the book, but before we do that, just give listeners a little flavor of sort of your professional qualifications, like what got you to where you are and what do you do today besides being an author?
Sure. So I started my career, I have to do the numbers, but it's about 22 years ago. And during these last 22 years, I've really been a trusted advisor in several capacities. So I started out my career as a tax attorney working around the dot-com boom, and I was advising business owners, entrepreneurs on tax strategies around kind of liquidity events that they were anticipating, whether it was through an IPO or a sale. And then after my first husband passed away, I pivoted and I was hired to be a corporate attorney for an incubator where I started companies. I basically was on the other side of company stock, where I was creating the company stock and understanding how all of that works and how it's all structured, and advising the CEOs whose companies I was either helping fund or getting going. And then after the whole dot-com boom went belly up, I ended up back in the world of investment financial tax advising, where I had a firm called Kirkland Advisors. And I worked with a couple of public companies where I was advising their employees on their stock options, on their restricted stock, on the tax implication of that. And then finally, I ended up in the practice of law for really the first time in a private practice, working with more Main Street business owners, Main Street mom and pop shops, businesses, as well as individuals. And I realized that they were very, very underserved in terms of really advice on tax, on estate planning. And about 2008, 2009, I realized that I had a personal story that came from the loss of my first husband, who died very suddenly. And I realized that in order to really serve my greatest purpose, I needed to marry that professional experience with my personal experience. And so that was when I decided to start my own estate planning practice, where we do planning a little differently. We know that, our days are numbered on earth, right? We know that's going to happen. And, it's very scary. And we've created a process whereby clients become partners in the process of planning, become invested in planning. And more recently, I decided to create a financial services company, or actually resurrect Kirkland Advisors as Kendall Wealth. And really, birth of that company comes from the fact that, once you have your estate plan, it's time to have a good life. And I am very much focused on helping people have a good life, especially those that are going through transitions like divorce and death of a spouse.
So you let the cat out of the bag a little bit in terms of your qualifications to write this book about a widow's guide. You said that you lost your first husband. Set the time frame for us. About how long ago did that happen?
So it will be 19 years this October.
Okay. And so you wrote this book about a year ago. Can you talk a little bit about what brought you to the point of wanting to kind of share that story and share the lessons that are in the book about, some of the practical steps that people can take afterwards? How did you get to writing this?
Sure. So I have been working with women in my practice for since 2009 and well before that. And I really saw a common struggle that they all were experiencing in their journey, from the initial shock to kind of 3 years later, feeling stronger, feeling more empowered in some way. And I felt that every woman in particular, but every person who certainly goes through this, needs to have some sort of framework to go through this journey. And, in my personal experience, it took me 18 years to get this book out. This was a big hurdle. There was a lot of fear associated with writing the book, fear of a lot of different things, but what ultimately led me to write this book was the desire to really help people and to coach people in a very supportive way through this extremely difficult journey. Do
you mind sharing, how much of the lessons that you share in the book are things that you knew when you lost your husband? Are they all things that you had to learn the hard way over the course of the 18 years? How much of this was something that you personally experienced?
Well, I would say that when Ron died, I was an attorney already for, 4 years, and he was an attorney. So I had already worked in tax and estate planning. So my exposure to this area, was already there. But I was paralyzed after he died. I felt like any discussion around money, anything dealing with estate was just this horrible stab back in my heart. And any money, any life insurance, anything that dealt with money was just blood money. It was somehow, meant to replace, really my wonderful husband who I miss terribly. So when I wrote the book, I really wrote it from the perspective of, I have walked in these shoes. I have had to go through all of these steps on my own and make these difficult decisions on my own. And the framework I didn't have when I was going through it myself. So that framework is one that I have created over the years in working with my clients.
So let's do this. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want you to talk a little bit more about some of the practical lessons that are in the book and things that the listeners can take away from that, including where we're going to find this book and why we should buy it. So do you mind sticking with us through the next segment?
Sure.
Sounds great. So listen, we'll be right back with Make It Last, where we are joined today by Anna Byrne, estate planning attorney and investment advisor, who's written a widow's guide, your legal and financial guide to surviving your first year. Stick with us on after the break, and we'll talk about what you can take out of this book and use in your own life.
Do you have an IRA or 401k? Most Americans do. The IRS doesn't let you avoid paying taxes on that account forever, and your required minimum distributions, or RMDs, will affect your financial health in many ways. If you have an IRA or 401k, you need to attend this free class hosted by Victor Medina. If you're at or near retirement age, you'll soon have to pay taxes on your IRAs and other tax-deferred savings accounts. Taxes on RMDs can be a major financial burden unless you know how to protect yourself. Learn simple strategies that could save you thousands. Victor Medina, a certified financial planner and wealth protection strategist, is going to teach you how to minimize the taxes you pay on your IRA distributions, including how to avoid the 50% tax penalty for taking the wrong amount. In addition, you'll learn how to leave a legacy behind for your kids and grandkids. Education is the key element in preventing unnecessary taxes. Don't just assume that everything is going to be all right. Make a plan now before it's too late. There are ways to protect your money. Spots are limited for the free educational workshop, so visit MakeItLastRadio.com/IRA to reserve your seat. If you have an IRA or 401k, go to MakeItLastRadio.com/IRA today.
Well, welcome back from the break. I'm joined today by a special guest. Her name is Anna Byrne. She's an estate planning attorney and an investment advisor. She runs her law firm through Eckert Byrne and her financial advisement firm through Kendall Wealth. She's a practicing estate planning attorney and investment advisor in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and she's authored a book called A Widow's Guide, Your Legal and Financial Guide to Surviving Your First Year. Now, Anna, you shared with us the very personal story of sort of the fact that you are a widow and some of the struggles that you had sort of dealing with the after effects of that. I love this book. I got to tell you, I got a chance to read through it. It has both just wonderfully written personal parts about what you had to go through and, really sympathetic ears to what other people need to go to. But there's also this practical side in that and sort of these action lists and journals. Tell me a little bit about your decision to sort of marry those two things together and what you think is important for people who have lost a spouse and how they move on. Why do they need to kind of keep these two things going at the same time?
So by the two things going, do you mean the legal and the financial?
No, I actually mean sort of these soft issues about journaling and dealing with the emotional after effects of the loss, as well as sort of the practical steps of putting one foot in front of another. Your book kind of marries those two things together.
Right. So the book is a way for women to start conquering their fear and focusing their attention on positive small steps that they can take to move forward. The book is really laid out in a way that, it's hard to see the light. It's hard to see that, your heart will ever mend, that you will ever be able to focus again, that you will ever be able to wake up and feel okay. So I really wanted to share my personal story as an inspiration, because I have come out to the other side where I have happiness in my life and, I have a completely different perspective, even though I remember those dark days. So the book is laid out with some very practical information to provide an understanding, kind of a basic understanding of what is going on, because this is something that I have found that women in particular are so afraid of. They don't know what probate is. They don't know how things work. And so I really wanted to provide an education about how, what the process actually is, but then also practically outline tasks with checkbox that you can take, you can go through yourself, you can have someone help you. But the whole purpose of this book is to provide people this kind of forward motion. And the journaling pages are part of that, because I recall when months after Ron died, my mom and dad forced me to go see a therapist. And I thought, geez, I really don't need to talk to someone. And so I to humor them, I went through this process and I met with this therapist, and I said to him after a couple of sessions, I really feel like I don't need you. Can you just explain why you think, this is a benefit to someone like me? And he said, well, because, I don't have a personal relationship with you, and I could honestly give you a sense of how you're moving along in your journey and that you're actually making progress. And so the journaling pages are kind of representative of that. And he was so right. He was so right, because, I did not see my progress. I couldn't see my progress. I was blind to it. But if you write it down, for example, you can go back a year later or months later and look at that first entry and see how you were feeling compared to how you're feeling today, or the questions that you had that you've now answered. It's really about giving women in particular this feeling of forward movement and an ability to go back and say, wow, look at all these boxes that I've checked, if that's all you do. Or look at the journal pages that you've gone through, and you can see that progress, because every single person going through this journey makes progress. It might be small, it might be large, but you're making progress. And it's wonderful if you can somehow document it so that you can see it and feel proud, because part of getting to the other side, kind of getting through this grief journey, is overcoming all of your fears and overcoming your anxieties. And that's really what I wanted this book to be, is kind of this guiding light, through this journey with practical steps, as well as, a personal way for you to document what you're doing kind of on a monthly step-by-step basis, so that you can look back and feel really proud of what you've accomplished.
So in your life, you had the help of the sort of objective, emotional support of the therapist, and then you brought the background for the legal and financial in large part because of your professional training. Do you think there's a role in widows' lives for that objective legal and financial advice? And if so, what does that look like?
Oh, absolutely. As women go through this journey, there's basic information that I provide in the book, but it's certainly not enough to be able to make specific decisions on their particular situation. I feel very strongly that having a team of advisors working together in an orchestrated way is in the best interest of the widow. And partly where they need to begin is accepting the fact that they need help. And that's really difficult. Help in the sense of friends, help in the sense of professionals. And I think one of the hurdles is really, how do you go about finding a professional that is the right professional?
That's what I was going to ask you. Exactly. How do we figure out who that's right, right for them? Do you have advice on that?
I do. And in the book, I've actually offered, a series of questions that they can use to interview an estate administration attorney, a financial advisor, things to ask, things like, how do you bill? How are you going to communicate with me? And all of those really important things that you may not think of. And so I wrote those all out. And so there are questions that you can take with you as you interview your professional. So I would say the key advisors are obviously the attorney who's going to be helping you make kind of these legal decisions and taking you through the legal process of settling an estate. Having a financial advisor is really critical because the big question, and I've seen this over and over, whether you have a $25 million estate or a $200,000 estate, the biggest fear that someone is facing is, do I have enough money to pay my bills? And having someone who can sit down and objectively say, you know what, Sarah, you are fine because here's what you have. And here's, the projection that I did for you in terms of cash flows and, so on and so forth. So the attorney, the financial advisor, and the tax preparer, sometimes, you have one that's great. Other times you need to go out and find an accountant who can help with various other aspects of your financial life, dealing with taxes. Someone is going to have to help you with that. And so the book definitely has questions that you can use to interview, these three different kinds of advisors.
Well, that's great. And like I said, I love this book. If for no other reason, I mean, it's substantively fantastic, but I think it's also has a great fanciful attraction, which is that the cover is made out as an adult coloring book. So, if nothing else, people can occupy their time by coloring in, the cover along the way. If people want to learn more about the book, in fact, even to buy it, where can they go to learn more about the book?
So I self-published this book, so it's available on Amazon. So you just have to search Anna Byrne, A Widow's Guide in the search bar on the Amazon website, and you will find me. And you could purchase the book. You can preview the book a little bit as well. I believe the first kind of chapter is available for free preview. And you can also go to my website that I have set up for my book. It's called annabyrne.com.
Okay, great. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop that into the show notes for people that are listening on iTunes and want to go to the website. And if you're listening live on the radio, you can go to makeitlastradio.com and check out episode 8, and we'll put a link there that will give you the link, because Anna Byrne is ANNA, so 2 N's there, and it's BYRNE.com, and you can check out more. Well, Anna, I want to thank you for being my guest here today. I think this is great information that you've shared with other people. I think that if there's anybody out there who has personally experienced a loss or knows of somebody who's experienced this loss, and purchasing this book and giving it to them, I think is probably one of the best gifts that they could give. So thank you so much for spending this morning here with us and sharing this great information. You've been a fantastic guest.
Thank you so much, Victor. I really appreciate you inviting me and allowing me to share my story.
Well, this has been Make It Last with Victor Medina. I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to thank our guest, Anna Byrne, for joining us here today. Again, if you're interested in learning more about that, you can go to www.nbsp.org AnnaByrne.com, and that's ANNABYRNE.com. If you like this show, as well as any of the other shows that we have, feel free to subscribe on iTunes so that you can get this show delivered to your email inbox or your favorite podcatcher, as well as going back to listening to old shows where we cover things like annuities, IRAs, everything that's important for you in retirement. And I want to thank everybody who helps produce this show. There's a great team behind us that puts this show together. This has been Make It Last with Victor Medina, where we help you keep your legal ducks in a row and your financial nest egg secure. Join us again next Saturday.
The foregoing content reflects the opinions of Medina Law Group, LLC and Private Client Capital Group, LLC, and is subject to change at any time without notice. Content provided herein is for informational purposes only and should not be used or construed as investment or legal advice or a recommendation regarding the purchase or sale of any security or to follow any legal strategy. There is no guarantee that the strategies, statements, opinions, or forecasts provided herein will prove to be correct. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Indices are not available for direct investment. Any investor who attempts to mimic the performance of an index would incur fees and expenses which would reduce returns. All investing involves risk, including the potential for loss of principal. There's no guarantee that any investment plan or strategy will be successful. We recommend that you consult with a professional dedicated to your needs.